The book has been used to heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons or evil spirits, and open blind eyes. The book has helped some people tap into the future of what will happen in the coming days, months, or years. This same book has warned that there will be a time when a lifeless object will be made to speak, and that many will be caused to worship the object which has been given the ability to speak. This object will be like some sort of a god, and it will wage war against man and prevail. It will not be defeated by man, but by the rock, Jesus, which will come down from heaven to cause a reset, and those who has followed the teachings of Jesus and believed in him will be saved from the coming destruction. So we are seeing a rock coming that will hit the earth and cause a reset on a fallen world. But we don't understand the UFO narrative. It will continue to be referred to as UFOs or aliens. But those who have read this book will understand that spiritual beings, angels, chariots of fire, glorified men can fly. This book has noted that before the earth is destroyed, the people who believed in Jesus Christ and his finished work on the cross will fly to him, caught up with him in the clouds. Caught up with him in the clouds. So the media will continue to call them UFOs or aliens to make people believe that when these people begin to fly up to the clouds, they will say the aliens are now leaving the earth. And one man, the Antichrist, will say, now peace will be on earth, and that those causing trouble has gone. They will form a one-world government which will be ruled by the Antichrist, who will cause everyone, both small or big, white or black, rich or poor, to be given a mark or a name or a number on their right hand or on their foreheads. These ideas have already started, and technology will be used. The mark may start slowly outside the body, on your devices, bank accounts, etc. And slowly the devices are going to be put into the body with convincing narratives that it will make life easier than carrying a device externally. Slowly, the external devices will be phased out. You know how newer technologies replace old technologies. You know how you can no longer use a 3G phone in some countries because they want a 4G or 5G phone. So it will be enticing and optionally mandatory. You remember how you cannot walk or enter certain places if you don't have a COVID certificate. These things will happen with less opposition, as the pioneers have learned from previous events how to silence people or minimize opposition through money, exclusion, or social media censorship, which may include total banning or shadow banning. The exclusion or ban will be done so that when people who have read the book, in bracket, the Bible, speak, only few lucky people will hear or see and be enlightened. They know that you cannot be enlightened unless you hear or read the truth. They will keep people distracted, focusing on the basis of life, walking, eating, and drinking to feed the body, which is just a container of their real self, which is the soul and the spirit. As people focus on their body, they ignore their soul or spirit, which is important for a better life. Souls are empty and will take whatever message given to it. Souls are bound to behave according to the message stored in it. So, truth from the book, the Bible, will be restricted from the individual or made uninteresting. So the individual does not know that there is a better life, a life where you won't be sick, a life where there is no mental health issues, because people have peace, happiness, and they love one another. A life where there is no fear, because people know exactly what is ahead of them. A life where people know their origin and the dominion given to them over the earth by their Creator. If the soul and spirit are strengthened by the truth, the Bible, the body can overcome most things that come against it. A strengthened soul makes it easier to hear God's voice and be moved by the Spirit of God. When the good people are moved to the clouds or rapture to meet Jesus, it will become very difficult for people who are left behind to repent, unless they recognize the disappearance of people as signs that what the Bible has said is happening. If they see this and decide to repent, turning to Jesus and his teachings, they will have a chance of being saved, especially if they have not taken the mark, the name or number on their right hand, on their forehead. Some good people will remain behind to help the new converts. It will be unfortunate if they didn't get the opportunity to repent before they die. The other unfortunate set of people are those who will go ahead and take the mark or the name or the number on their right